Working. Okay, it's setting it up. So welcome, everyone. On behalf of Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba and our sponsor, Love You by Shoppers Drug Mart, thank you for joining us tonight as we gather to listen to the fourth speaker in our Women's Speaker Series, Crushing the Stigma One Story at a Time. The Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba offices are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. At this time, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Shoppers Drug Mart, who make events like this possible. In Manitoba, we are their charity of choice, which means the proceeds from Run for Women go towards supporting our women's program at Mood Disorders. We could not do the work that we do without their support. We love you, shoppers. Our Women's Speaker Series is a monthly online series via Facebook Live, airing the third Thursday of each month at 7 p.m. The Speaker Series was created to give those who identify as women in our community a platform to speak about their stories in the open and to feel empowered in doing so. Featuring a different speaker each month, the series kicked off on September 23rd, 2021, and ends on April 21st, 2022. The series is based on our peer support model. We empower those who suffer from mental illness to share their lived experiences and recovery stories of hope in a safe and supportive environment. We are very grateful to each speaker for sharing her story and providing hope for others who may be struggling. As a general disclaimer, the views, information, or opinions expressed during our Women's Speaker Series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba and its employees. The primary purpose of this speaker series is to empower women by crushing the stigma of mental health, one story at a time. This speaker series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Tonight, we welcome another amazing speaker, Alison Ritchie. Alison is a mother of two, an herbalist, a traditional postpartum wellness practitioner, a holistic birth keeper, and a women's health and wellness advocate. Her own personal experiences with postpartum depression, depletion, and burnout has been the fuel and motivation for her to dive deep and learn all she possibly can around the short but very potent and vulnerable sacred postpartum season. Alison has spent the last 13 years attending births and serving women in the postpartum time and brings with her not only her own lived experiences, but hundreds of experiences of the women she has walked with throughout the childbearing year. She is passionate about growing her own food and gardening, homesteading, nutrition, and spending quality time with her family and her friends. Tonight, Ali will be sharing her story, titled "A Healthy Baby Isn't the Only Thing That Matters: Safeguarding Yourself from Postpartum Depression." Alison's presentation on postpartum depression seeks to shine light on how it is imperative for women to set themselves up for a smooth transition into motherhood while still in pregnancy. She will talk about holistic ways to prepare and nourish yourself as a key to building a bridge into the fourth trimester. She will also be sharing her own journey of how a traumatic birth experience in the medical world set the stage for postpartum depression and the way she navigated through both of her postpartum experiences. Without further ado, here's Ali.
Thank you, Pam. Can you hear me okay, everybody? Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. Yes, of all of the hats I wear in this world, being a mother is probably the most sacred to me. And you know, I'm an empathetic woman who feels this world deeply, and nothing that I do in this world is really surface level. And it's a real honor to be here tonight and to share honestly and very raw in a raw state of what postpartum depression and depletion can look like, and how, we may not be prepared to go in that direction. We never want to go in that direction, but I want to really speak honestly and from my heart tonight as much as I can. And, as we go into the darkest days of the year here, I have to be honest that it was difficult for me to really open up and dissect my own postpartum experiences, because they were not easy. And I do this tonight with the intention that it will help other women realize that there's nothing to be ashamed of, that we're doing the best that we can, and that there's no shame. There's no shame at all. So my talk this evening, as you had mentioned, is going to be partly of my experiences with my own postpartum depression, and as well with the many women that I've worked with as my role as a birth keeper and a traditional postpartum practitioner. So first of all, I want to define the word postpartum, because for many years, postpartum and depression was this interchangeable, synonymous word. And what postpartum actually means is the period of time after any pregnancy. So whether that's a full-term birth, whether that's a stillbirth, an abortion, or a miscarriage, you are in a season of postpartum. So it's after you've carried life in your womb. And so I just want to make that clear, because like I say, I think it was in the 70s and 80s, someone would say, oh, Sharon over there, she's got postpartum. And postpartum isn't an emotion, it's a period of time. So I just wanted to be clear on that as well. So my own journey, here we go. So it's important for me to go back a little bit and not just talk about the postpartum, but what set the stage for the postpartum that I had. And that started in my pregnancy. And so just need to let it come through here. I was a young 20-something, mid-20 girl, and none of my friends were having babies at the time. I was kind of like the only gal having a kid. So I felt like I was really on my own when it came to pregnancy. I didn't have friends that I could rely on or tell me what to do, or where to turn to, or what books to read. I really felt like I was in it on my own. And it was a happy accident, but it was unexpected that I found myself pregnant. And so there was this instant change of direction in my life. And it took a while for me to figure everything out. And I finally, allowed myself to start reading books and diving deep into things. I went to the doctor, I did all the tests. I realized that I was, doing what I was supposed to do. I felt very compliant, and I was, going to all the appointments and doing all of those things. And it wasn't until towards the end of my pregnancy that I started reading some books on spirituality and the idea that birth could be a rite of passage and not just this medical event. And, in the medical system, there didn't seem to be much room for that, or it was like an afterthought. It wasn't really something in the foreground. And what I've come to know is that the medical birth world is very focused on the physical aspects of birth. And what I know now as a holistic practitioner is that there's no separation between the physical and the emotional and the mental and the spiritual. These are all parts of our amazing selves, and we can't fragment ourselves in this way. And, so the very idea of a healthy baby is the only thing that matters. That's like saying only the physical part of you matters in a way. And that's just not true. We have to take into account that we are whole beings. We are full spectrum beings. And so fast forward to the time of my labor, and I have to mention too that like I felt in hindsight that there was a lot of grooming in terms of, you know, this notion that you can trust the system, you can trust your doctors, you can trust what they say to be true, and we would never do anything that isn't in your best interest. And I'm going to talk a lot tonight about the medical industrial birth world. And it's not an attack on the doctors and nurses themselves. It's more of the system at large and how the system at large is failing postpartum women. And so, you know, back to the labor, I was 42 weeks pregnant. So, you know, already I was overdue. You know, I wasn't fitting into the box that they want babies to be born in. I was like pushing that boundary. And so I was induced, and automatically right there, that was an intervention, right? So something to know is physiological birth, which is a natural birth, is where you get the natural download of hormones. You get the full experience of birth, unadulterated, raw in its purest form. You can feel safe. But anytime there's intervention, it's just that, right? It's an intervention. There's an intervention in the hormones. There's an intervention in the natural unfolding of a woman's process. So I was induced, and, you know, I felt like I was really on the clock because I wasn't speeding up. I wasn't dilating as fast as they would have liked. And so, you know, there's all of these sort of subliminal messages that because my body isn't progressing fast enough, then there must be something wrong with me, you know, and we're just going to give you a little bit of medicine to help speed things up. And, you know, next thing you know, my contractions were not my own. You know, I was having synthetic hormones put in, which I could not deal with on my own. My birth became this beast of its own, and, you know, which led to another intervention, which was an epidural. And it just really, really became this traumatic event. And so my son's heart rate was really, really dropping. And what had ended up happening is they had to cut an episiotomy, and my baby was basically pulled out of me and taken away and taken from me. And, you know, there's so much trauma that happens, and there's so much downloading and so many absolutely necessary things that happen in that juncture when a baby is born and is separated from its mother. All of this downloading and imprinting gets lost. And, you know, we're humans, and we're living in this technological age, but we're still animals. And you can see the stress that happens with, you know, even farm animals or zoo animals that are, when their babies are separated. Like, it's absolutely traumatic to both the mother and the baby. And we seem to think that because, you know, the baby is now outside of the mother, that they are separate. But we now know that there's this, it's called the mother baby, and the mother baby should be one unit, and they should not be separated under, you know, any circumstances, provided, you know, medical emergencies. But everything seemed to be, you know, we're just going to take him away for observation. Nothing, like, he was breathing, he was okay. Anyways, this obviously had a very profound effect on me, and I was completely beaten up in so many ways. The you know, nature of birth is a journey on its own, never mind all the interventions and you know, traumatic experiences that had happened. And so, you know, I got to my postpartum room, and finally they brought my baby to me, my son to me the next day, and I was trying to nurse him, and I was was in just this really numb state of shock, and like I was frozen and couldn't believe what was going on, and I was having a hard time feeling anything. Partly because I was on painkillers, partly because of the shock, partly because I hadn't slept, and I just had a baby and all of these things. But I felt really ashamed, and I felt really like I failed somehow, even though I had done nothing wrong. And, as I get further and further from my own births, and I get more experience, and I've, get more courses under my belt, and I can see what actually happened, I don't feel those things anymore. But in the moment, when doctors were coming to check my episiotomy scar, I felt ashamed, and I felt mortified, and I felt embarrassed, and like I just wanted to run and hide. And I was just panicked and freaking out because, like I say, my baby and I were separated from one another. And so part of who I am and what I do was like, I needed to go start seeing births. 10 months after healing with my son, I knew in my heart that I needed to start attending births because I needed to see what the heck was going on in the birth world. And so partly it was a way for me to heal from my own experience and for me to understand what was going on. And so I really took it upon myself to start attending these births. And I saw many, many births. And what astounded me the most was that my story was not unique. My story was the story that many women tell and have told. And that is what really triggered something in me, I'm kind of all over the place here with me, but just bear with me. But that's why I started birth keeping and attending births, was because I needed to see it. And I got my baby home, back to when I was having my baby. I got my baby home, and I was still in this really foreign place within my own body. And I was swollen like a blimp from all of the extra fluids. And I had a public health nurse come over, and I remember asking if my milk had come in. And she actually laughed at me because my breasts were engorged, they were full of milk, but my whole body was swollen and I didn't know. And because I hadn't slept, and because I hadn't had a time to rest, I was just delirious and out of my mind. And I didn't know if my baby was getting enough food. And here I have this health professional kind of scoffing and laughing at the fact that of course there's milk in your breasts. Look at you. And I felt like an idiot and shamed. And I ended up kicking her out of my house. But yeah, I felt like I was in a bubble, and people would come and see my son and my new baby. And I felt like I had to put on this performance every time. No, I'm fine. No, it's great. I'm healing, I'm doing it. It was like this badge of honor I had to wear, to show everybody that no, I made it through, and I'm here, and I'm, getting back into my skinny jeans, like what they tell you have to do. And inside I was just dying. I was so alone. I felt completely isolated, and nobody understood what I was going through. And I remember about 6 weeks after my son was born, I remember changing his diaper, and it was as palpable a feeling as if ice around me had melted. And it's almost like the fog started to clear up. And I remember talking to my son hey, oh, there you are. It was something, and I don't exactly know what it was that shifted or what triggered the shift, but I started to come back to myself. And I started to realize that I was snapping out of it a bit, this fog that I had been in, and this spell that I had been under, and the weeks of weeping, and not only because I was recovering with a horrible episiotomy scar, but because I feel like my spirit had taken a hit. I felt really taken advantage of, and I felt I was hurt. And every year on my son's birthday is like the one day of the year that I allow myself to really like send some love to that spiritual scar tissue that him and I share together. But this was 13 years ago, and it still feels like when I talk about it, it still feels like it was yesterday. So thanks for bearing with me here. Whew. So back to the part where I was talking about when I started attending births and realizing that this was not a unique story to me, and that this was actually an experience that many women had. What I realized is that women are being robbed of a very significant rite of passage, a milestone in their life. And, a healthy baby is not the only thing that matters. And at some point, we need to stop focusing on why we are pulling women out of the water. And we need to start focusing on why are they falling into the water in the first place. We are focusing on the wrong thing, And so I felt really chewed up and spit out the other end of the medical industrial world. And I felt like them slapping a label of postpartum depression on me was a way to, step away from any of the blame or any of the abuse or any of the gaslighting that I had felt in my birth. And I say that for my own experience. And I say that walking with other women in their own births and watching the horror unfold. And it's not to say that this happens to every woman. I have seen beautiful births unfold in the hospital, but I have seen a hell of a lot of traumatic, awful births in the hospital system. And so I made the declaration last year that I will not attend hospital births anymore because I just can't operate under that medical model. Again, it's this idea too that we have to come to understand that postpartum mothers who are depressed and anxious are not the problem. It is the symptom. And that famous quote, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's what this is. I'm not saying there aren't good intentioned people trying to do good things, but the reality is that the whole system is not designed to support thriving life. And to say that a healthy baby is the only thing that matters completely dismisses anything to do with the mother and who is looking after the mother. And what we don't realize and what we're coming to realize is that, this whole mother-baby dyad and that they are one unit and the health of the mother is in direct correlation to the health of the baby. So, again, to say that you have a healthy baby, what more could you want? Well, what more could we want is healthy mothers to look after those healthy babies. And we can't have healthy babies if we don't have healthy mothers, So there's this big thing around pathologizing maternal mental health. And yeah, there's a lot of things that contribute to that. Some of it could be thyroid dysfunction, nutrient deficiencies, autoimmune conditions. There's many things that can present as postpartum depression or that can manifest as postpartum depression and anxiety. But, whenever there's any kind of interruption in the physiological process of labor and birth and the early postpartum, whenever there's attachment or breakage of the bond between the mother and baby, this can manifest as depression. And so I felt like that was a big light bulb that went off in my head. Like, maybe all the moms out there who are depressed are actually having a perfectly healthy response to a really sick society. And almost like, how dare they slap a label on me saying that I was the problem or that, all these women that I worked with are experiencing depression when in fact they had been treated like crap and disrespected, and their bodies and their spirits and their emotions and their mental realms were just like afterthoughts. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to think that this is how we're treating mothers and women in 2021, almost 2022. It's barbaric, and it happens today all the time. And so I don't feel like I'm a victim. I've worked through all of my stuff. I feel like a victor, and I feel like an advocate, and that I have to use my voice to help spread awareness and shine light on the fact that it's not our fault. And yeah. So the next part of what I want to talk about here is, some of the insights into postpartum and how we can really look at this time as building a bridge from late pregnancy into the 4th trimester and into the postpartum, because that's a huge piece of building a solid foundation, and if you don't have a solid foundation, then, you're working on a crumbly ground, and anything can go wrong. So you need to build that solid foundation. And part of what I do as a postpartum, traditional postpartum practitioner is I weave through these 5 insights that are common through all traditional societies and all cultures around the world. And so the first one is retreating. And, we've been sold this idea in Hollywood that we need to get back into our skinny jeans right away, and that like it's almost this badge of honor to be like, oh, did you see Sharon? She was at the mall with her baby on the hip, and she's like just had her baby 2 weeks ago. And it's like, what the heck are we showing people is normal? Like, that's so far from what should be going on. So retreat. And the reason why we want to retreat, everything from closing the blinds and kind of making a womb-like area for the mother herself is because the mother has been reborn. And in order for a woman to open up and birth a baby, that requires a lot of expansion and a lot of opening up, making her very vulnerable and very susceptible to everything from, illnesses and viruses to cold to all sorts of probably energetic things too, which I won't go into, but that's the idea, is like a woman has to expand to bring her baby down. And part of the reason why we want to retreat and keep people to a minimum, visitors to a minimum, is to avoid bringing in anything into the mother's area that might really get into her body. In Ayurveda, which is the traditional medical model of India, it's said that it's almost the same as leaving all of the windows and the doors of the house open, so that all sorts of drafts and wind and anything can come in. And so the idea of creating like this mother sanctuary, where you pretty much don't leave your bed unless you need to go pee or, do a couple other little things, excuse me. This is going to set you up to rest and prevent many things like prolapses. The woman that's running around in her skinny jeans, mall walking 2 weeks after having a baby, while she may look all put together and everything, she's also putting herself at risk for prolapses, because we have prolactin running through our bodies for weeks after having babies. I said relaxin, right? Yeah, relaxin running through our body, that hormone. And so that's gonna, really, gravity isn't working for us in the postpartum. And so, all of those organs, your uterus, everything, gravity will pull it down if we're not careful, which is why we want to be lying in bed and resting. And there's this huge, part of our culture that doesn't think that resting is important. And I often say it's kind of like yoga practice, and it's the people who skip the savasana, which is the last part of the yoga class where everything gets integrated and you kind of relax and, bring it into your experience. And that is essentially what the postpartum time is. If you skip the savasana, the postpartum, you're going to go into a deficit somewhere down the line. And it might not be right away, but it will show up at some point. And so retreating, really realizing that nobody needs to be in your immediate postpartum space other than select people, that you trust and that you feel safe with. And that's important for all of the reasons mentioned above. So another thing is finding out who your tribe is. So modern day mothers hold the weight of whole communities on their shoulders. We are doing the work of whole communities. We have evolved for a world that doesn't exist anymore. We used to live in tribes and in community with people, and there would be, aunties and sisters and friends that you could pass your baby to so you could have a nap, or, there was community. And now we all live in our homes and we all connect via Facebook, and we all, do these things to try and stay connected. But the reality is we've never been more disconnected. And then you throw on top of that a pandemic where women are home alone. We're not allowed to have visitors. People are wearing masks, so nobody can see or reflect to them that they are being seen for their own transformation. I think depression and anxiety is a completely normal response to a really messed up time in this world. And that's the truth. There's nothing wrong with you. If you're sitting there watching this, I hope you know that this time is just bananas. And I feel horrible that women and mothers are not being more supported in this time. It's actually ridiculous, because, the future of our species actually lies in the nervous system of new mothers and of new babies. And babies co-regulate off of their mothers. So if a mother is feeling panicked and not feeling well and anxious and unsettled, that's the vibration and the wavelength that her baby is also going to pick up on then. You know what I mean? So part of my work in this world as a postpartum doula is to help mother the mother. And essentially I'm trying to recreate the community and, trying to be the auntie and the mother and the sister and all of those things, because we're so isolated on so many levels, pre-pandemic and post, or, now that we're in this pandemic. It's really, really unfortunate. Another thing is ritual. We talk about, yes, you physically have a baby. It's beautiful. Your body has gone through this huge metamorphosis and this huge transformation. And it's a beautiful thing. And, we can actually see the body expanding and growing, and we can see physically the changes. But what we don't necessarily see is the spiritual and the emotional and the mental aspects of what pregnancy and postpartum does to us. And just as adolescent brains develop and change very rapidly, that is the same thing that happens with mothers when they are transforming from maidens into mothers. There's a whole brain transformation. It's also this rite of passage, right? It's this real milestone in a woman's life where she can mark and look back and never be the same. And sometimes women will have baby showers. Sometimes women will have, they're called blessing ways or mother blessings. This is a way for our community, our tribe, to see us And it is important as human beings that we are seen by our community. It may seem like not an important thing, but I know every mother wants to be seen. And I feel like a lot of postpartum depression is stemmed in women not being seen for their transformation, not being seen for their process, not being seen for the enormity that they are carrying. You know, it's huge, and it just gets really brushed aside and overlooked. And this is one of the things for our community to be, we need to be witnessed by our community, and it's about honoring. And yeah, I mean, we used to live in these communities again, and there would be some sort of initiation. You know, boys would have their time in the woods where you would go through something and come back different. And so it's important that we are, that's reflected to us by our community and by our people. So another thing is warmth. And I kind of talked a little bit about that with the retreat, but warmth is huge. Even when it's hot summer, postpartum women need to be very mindful about any kind of drafts. As I had mentioned, the house with the doors and the windows open, it's really a big thing. So the bottom of the feet actually directly correlate with the womb. And it is known in traditional Chinese medicine that during birth, a lot of heat and a lot of wind element is lost. And so traditional postpartum practices aim to restore and fill the woman up with heat. Because even in herbalism, it is known that like cold is death and heat is life. So we often, you know, if a woman had an episiotomy or something, they're like, you know, get some cold packs on her. And like, that's the worst thing you can do. We actually want the heat. We want the inflammation, because that's going to speed up healing. And healing, you know, physically healing scars actually has a profound effect on our emotional state. And because how can you feel happy if every time you need to go pee, you're in tears because of the pain? You know, like there's no separation between our whole being. Our physical is just as important as the emotional, the mental to the spiritual. It is all important, and you cannot separate and segregate these things when talking about whole health. Because if someone is not emotionally happy, what kind of life are you going to be leading, you know? So your birth space matters. Another thing about building this bridge is where you're birthing, who is in your birth space. All of this stuff is really important, because women need to feel that they were in charge. They held the charge for their birth, that birth didn't happen to them. Birth wasn't done to them. They had a say in the way that things played out, and they had a say, even if there was interventions, even if they did want medicine to help with the pain, that they were conscious and they said, yes, I want that. That actually has a huge implication moving into the postpartum, just in terms of having a choice, having a say what happens to your own body, bodily autonomy. It's important that people have a say. And the other thing is, this is a really big part of my work, and it's food. And the more work that we can put in, like when I was pregnant with my son, I was basically given a Canada's food guide. And, you know, my doctor said, just eat lots of protein and, you know, lots of vegetables and you'll be fine. But the nutritional needs of a pregnant woman are very unique. And growing a human is a lot of work and takes a lot of energy. And so one of the biggest, and I find one of the easiest ways that we can build a strong foundation, a strong bridge into the fourth trimester, is to really focus on what we're eating, because what we're eating affects our hormones. What we're eating, you know, affects the whole body on so many different levels. So really understanding that the body needs fat and good fats to feed the brain, which is going through this big change. Fat, the end of pregnancy, babies are just basically putting on fat. And what we need to be clear on is that if you're not taking it in via your food, your baby's still going to be getting it, but they're going to be getting what they need from you. And so if you aren't replacing that, if you aren't actively, consciously replacing the fat and the nutrients and the minerals and the vitamins, all of those good things, you are the one that's going to be going into deficit as the mom. So it'll take calcium from your bones. It'll do what it needs, because that's the way life is designed. The baby will take what it needs so that it can thrive. And so I really want to emphasize that nutrition and learning some basic, herbal remedies that can really, really help strengthen the blood, strengthen the body, the mind, all of those things. It blows my mind that it isn't mainstream and that we're not all doing these sorts of things, in pregnancy. But really educating yourself from a whole different range of perspectives too was really, it's a really good thing to widen your reach and like really get good perspectives on what the medical industry is saying and what the holistic industry is saying and what traditional practices happened during and around pregnancy and birth and postpartum, and really doing the work within yourself to figure out what you want. And so often we are so quick to hand our power away to authority, and there's these hierarchical structures that say, well, the doctors are up here, so they must be right. And pregnant women and mothers are down here and patients are down here. But the reality is we are our own authorities. We get to say yes, we get to say no. It's all up to us. So yeah, so those are some things that you can focus on in terms of building that bridge into motherhood and really, setting yourself up for success. And again, the food piece, if you take one thing away from tonight, I would really say focus on what you're putting into your body, because we are what we eat, and we are like the fuel that we take in. And so high quality fats, high quality proteins, literally the building blocks to life. And, you don't want to get to the other side of pregnancy with this new baby and feel like you're digging yourself out of a ditch because you just don't have the resources or the stores to feel good because you're depleted. And, there really is an epidemic of postpartum depletion, which I think could be interchangeable with postpartum depression, because postpartum depletion, when women aren't getting their nutritional needs met, well, what's one of the first things that goes off is the thyroid. And so that has to be addressed, because the thyroid, then, women, there's so many things that the thyroid is in, that the thyroid governs and rules in our body and runs in our body. So women are very susceptible to thyroid issues, and the whole HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis. It's this hormonal framework that really, is susceptible to going off. Again, safeguarding with food and fats and a lot of nutritional powerhouses. So how am I doing for time here? Pretty good. Okay, 7:45. I could, postpartum is such a vast topic. There's so much to say and so much to cover. I know I've been a little bit all over the place here this evening, but, I want you to know that postpartum depression, what I really want you all to know is that I see you. And if you're a mom watching this right now, I want you to know that I see you. And I hope that we can maybe put my website out at some point. And if anyone needs to connect. There are amazing resources available here, and you can connect with me too, and that you are not alone, and that this is not your fault. And please reach out. And this is such the mothering journey is so in depth and intense, especially in this day and age with this whole pandemic and everything going on. And we need other people to help us regulate ourselves and to be seen and all of those things. So if you're struggling, please reach out. And there's no shame around that. You're having a perfectly healthy response to a really messed up world. And it's not you. And you are so loved.
Ali, thank you so much. That was an incredible 45 minutes with you. Honestly, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that you deeply impacted me. I know I've had the honor and the privilege of being in the birthing room with a few really close women friends, including my sister. And I have nothing but respect for anybody that goes through that process in a hospital. It's a very scary thing. And I think you really described it quite well. So thank you very much for that. I think right now what we're going to do is we're going to open up our chat lines. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dana. She's moderating our Facebook Live right now. So she's going to jump on and pose any questions that have come through for you.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you for again joining in on this speaker series. And if you haven't seen me yet in previous women's speaker series, guest moderation panels, my name is Dana and I'm the youth program coordinator here at Moods. And I'll just be sort of moderating a chat, but I've also been interacting with people. We've also put down our phone peer support lines. I also had put down your website, Ali, so people can check you out as well and see if they need any help, especially in delivering your baby. And other things, which is just really exciting. So I might kick it off if some questions haven't gone through in yet. Actually, it's something that I'm curious just because I am 23 and I also I love being around kids, and it's just something that I've always had thoughts about, whether I want to have a child in the future. And I know that's such a big idea for some people, but to be honest, it'll be here before I know it. And I think one of the questions I had in my that was percolating in my brain was, what sort of advice would you want to kind of give to young women who are hoping to maybe have a child in the future, and maybe things that they want to start now, just because I know the earliest the better, and I know it's, some people don't have the privilege, obviously, of being able to do it as young as they could, but if you had the option to do it, which that's kind of something that I've just been thinking about, as a young woman. What sort of things would you want to advise anybody that's looking to become a mom?
Yeah, I would say a big thing is reducing the toxic load that we take in. So whether that's just taking a look around your home, and it's incredible how many toxins we're all exposed to every day without just being alive in this world. But looking at things like scented candles and dryer sheets and all these kind of hidden toxins that are end up in our bodies and disrupting our hormones. That's a big thing. And the other thing again is food. Really building a strong body to house a baby is some of the easiest and most accessible things that most of us can do, is taking a look at getting rid of processed foods, eating whole foods. You can almost always reduce everything back to eating whole foods and eating real food and building a strong foundation. And so the other piece of that too is doing the work to call in a baby. And there's a great book called Awakening Fertility that I actually had the pleasure and honor of being a part of. And it's the other bookend to the first 40 days, which is a beautiful book that I would also recommend in terms of postpartum healing and traditional practices. But yeah, what does it take to call in a baby and in a good way and build a baby in a good way? Definitely start with food, I would say.
Wow. I definitely think it's something that, I'm always such a big thing of with candles, so maybe I have to think about reducing the intake that I do. And I think it's just because we're always so stimulated, I guess, by scented candles and everything that I guess we don't realize that there's a lot of chemicals that come into it. And even eating too, I feel like as a millennial and someone who thinks like, oh, my body is invincible if I eat 5 bags of chips. But obviously, when you think about it, your body does slow down, and um, I guess in other ways, it's just having to be mindful. So it's really nice to hear that these are things that actually aren't really hard to do. I guess it's just more so of keeping up and being consistent, which I think that's always been an issue with myself and probably anybody who tries to keep a good habit in check. Um, I guess another question I had too, I'm just checking to see if anybody has reached out to us. Oh, actually, we have a question. It's from Corey, who actually does work for us at Moods. So she's in the Westman region. So hi, Corey. Her question is, does the MDM postpartum depression peer support group still meet online? Is it for all of Manitoba or just a certain region? I know for us we can answer that question, but if Ali has any resources to share off the hop, we can also put that in the chat. I do believe, Pam, that we do have a program called, yeah, Baby Blues. I think that's one program we have. Postpartum is still up.
The postpartum peer support group, Tuesdays 2 to 3.
Yeah, so we'll put all that information down. But Ali, I don't know if you had any resources out for postpartum depression in particular.
My resource is myself. And instead of, I always say, I make the best baby shower gift. If you really want to safeguard against postpartum depression, have people pitch in to get a postpartum doula, because there is some really phenomenal postpartum doulas in our city. And it is something that you will never regret. You can't get that time back. So I really highly recommend investing in the mother.
Oh, that's so awesome. And actually, for anybody who hasn't heard of a doula before, if this is something maybe like new, would you be able to explain to us, I guess, in a little small paragraph what a doula is, what do they do, and are they affordable, that type of deal?
Yeah, I think it actually stems from the Greek word slave, to be honest. But I don't use the term doula all that much myself anymore, because I find that doulas are more often women who accompany women in hospital settings. Not always, but a lot. So, but essentially they're caretakers and to be with women during these transitional times. And so there's birth doulas, there's postpartum doulas. I prefer to call myself a birth keeper now, because it's more around, about the teachings and the lessons, and other than just the physical transition part of birth and postpartum. And they can be affordable. They range a lot. Some work on a sliding scale, some, but there's a lot in the city. There's no shortages of doulas right now, so.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, again, if anybody has any probably questions about that, then I definitely, again, I'll forward people to Ali, and then if people who rewatch this again want to reach out to us, we'll definitely connect you with them as well. I know that even our last speaker series, we had a couple of people who were just already talking about postpartum depression and saying how hard it is to find resources for new moms and feeling like they've been left out, which, I just feel that. I mean, I'm not a mom, but again, I kind of feel that as a need in the community, it seems like, for a lot of moms who just want guidance, because, maybe thinking about with my mom too, I just felt like she didn't have a handbook or a handy guide or somebody to be with her, so she had to be by herself for most of it. But to know that there are people like yourself, Ali, who help, you know, women in this world and help people heal, I think it's just very special. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and I really do hope people kind of come to you and help you, and you help them. Um, I would say I have another question too. I'm just being jealous, a little greedy now that I get the time to just ask. But another question I had was actually in terms of like support systems. So I don't know what your advice would be for any of the partners who are there with the women in the lives who are also seeing their partners change throughout this whole thing, and especially when they are done with that postpartum change. Do you think there are ways that partners can best support the new moms in this life? Because I know some of them might be like, ooh, what do I do in this situation? Or I feel so overwhelmed. Like, what if I say something and I just offend them off the hop? But I think it's nice to just get that kind of perspective, or what you would have to share.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. And there's no way I'm going to be able to sum that up in just a couple of minutes. But supporting women, I mean, learning as partners, learning how to cook some good food, not being afraid to get up in the night and do the diaper changes so that mom can sleep, making sure, like, as the partners, part of the role of the masculine and the man is to protect. So, you know, usually when there's a new baby, there's an onslaught of people who want to come in, and, you know, just being able to say we're not ready for that and really hold the space and guard the space. And we'll let you know when we're ready to receive visitors. But right now, the mom, whoever she is, you know, we're really focusing on healing and just bonding, and, you know, any interruption in that time really, and of course we want to like share our baby with the world and all of those things, but the more time that we spend visiting, the less time moms have resting and recovering. So, you know, the fathers and that masculine role can really be, the partner role can be guarding the space, cooking some food, some really good nutrient dense food, brothy soups, teas, things like that, and showing love and being compassionate and just, you know, showing up in all of those ways, and not being afraid to act on their own instincts around the birth of their baby, you know, because men have instincts too that they want to act on. So not being afraid to show up in that way.
Amazing. Well, this has been just so great to hear how, in your experiences and being able to also give that advice, I'm just really grateful that, you know, there are people like yourself who are just here helping new moms, helping support partners, and I really do hope that this takeaway has been for other people just a lesson to learn, or for people who are men too, who are watching probably this, that are just like, oh, now my eyes are open to the world of postpartum. So I would say that thank you. And so with that, I believe I'll close the Q&A section, but definitely if people do watch this and they're like, oh, I got a question, but I really want to ask Ali, definitely please let us know. Or again, I know in the chat I've posted your IG page and then the website too, so people can reach out there. But without further ado, we will probably close this off, and I'll pass it back to Pam.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you once again to Ali. You were just so amazing tonight, and I thank you for your bravery and your courage and sharing your story. And I know that there's probably quite a few women out there who have been touched by your words. So thank you so much, Ali. I really appreciate that you shared your evening with us tonight. I wanted to just say a few things. If you have been triggered at all by Ali's story, or you feel like you need any kind of support, we are here for you. You can call our peer support line at 204-560-1461, or toll free 1-800-263-1460. And we also have our postpartum peer support line, which operates Monday, Wednesday, and Friday right now from 9 to 9. And it's 204-560-1468. I'd also like to let everybody know that our next speaker coming up is Deborah Jonassen-Young, and she's going to be joining us on January 20th in the new year. So we hope you can join us for that speech as well. And on that note, I would just like to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and have a great night. Thank you so much.